Welcome to the Writers Center's virtual craft chat series, where we talk with writers a little less about what they wrote and a little more about how they wrote it. I'm Zach Powers, the Artistic Director at the Writers Center, and it's my joy to welcome our host for the evening, Ofelia Montelongo, who is a DC-based author and is a member of the Writers Center Board of Directors. So Ofe, I just want to hand off to you now, and I want to thank you so much for bringing this event to us and helping organize it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Hello, everyone. And I'm a writer, as Zach was telling you. I work at GW, and really, I'm a Mexican. I have an accent, just for you to know. And you can call me Ofe if you want to, or Hey You. Not just kidding. Don't call me Hey You. Just call me Ofe or Ofelia. It's totally fine. But we're not gonna talk about me today. We're gonna talk about Edgar. But before we start, I wanted to play 10 seconds of Bad Bunny because I promised Bad Bunny. Just 10 seconds so we can set the mood. Can everyone hear it? Can you hear it? So 10 seconds of Bad Bunny to set the mood of this talk, please. Okay, that's it. Because we need to talk about that. But get Bad Bunny in your ambience today, just to start with this talk. I love Bad Bunny. I know Edgar loves Bad Bunny as well. And so, let me introduce Edgar. Edgar Gomez, pronouns he, she, they, is a Florida-born writer with roots in Nicaragua and Puerto Rico, a graduate for University of California, Riverside MFA program. His works have appeared in Poets Writers, narrative, like tons of magazines that I'm not gonna list them all because there are a lot of them. He published High Risk Homosexual, this book that I hope everyone has it or goes and buy it today, and was published early this year in January 2000 this year. And he lives in Queens, New York, where he's saving for a good lotion. This was your bio on your book, so I don't know. This is gonna be my first question. Did you get your good lotion, Edgar?
That is so funny. Actually, yeah, once the book got published, I was like expecting everybody that I wrote about to hate me and to like never want to speak to me again. But one of my best friends who I wrote about in this chapter about doing burlesque sent me really nice lotion in the mail. And it was like a week after my book was published. I just got this really nice lotion and I was so happy, yeah.
So funny. Okay, so write the name of your favorite lotion in the chat, and then we're gonna get someone to get you good lotion. Just kidding. I mean, if you're not, I'm just kidding. Well, Edgar, welcome. Thank you, muchas gracias for being here. And I just want to open the conversation for anyone who wants to ask questions as well in the chat. I'm gonna try to keep up with the questions. I have a ton of questions for you, Edgar. I want to know everything about your book. Of course, I'm not gonna be able to ask you all the questions I want because we only have like, I don't know, 50 minutes left and probably 40 for me or 35 for me and the rest for questions of the audience. But first of all, congratulations on your awesome book. It's amazing. And again, I mean, just go and buy it. It's just amazing essays, chapters, and about Edgar's life with different themes that we're gonna talk about today. And I have two questions to start us off. The first one is about the title and about the process. And all of them have like different little questions, but the title, I know High Risk Homosexual comes from your chapter or essay with the doctor that clearly, right, like wrote, like in that note. So how do you decide that to be your title?
Okay, yeah. So originally the title was gonna be something else. And I'm a big, like, I judge a book by its cover and I judge a book by the title. And so I was sort of doing like some, I guess, testing where I would tell people my original title, which was Boys Club. And nobody, like, they'd be like, what's your book called? And I'd be like, Boys Club. And you could see like their eyes go dead and they didn't care. And so I was like, okay, this needs to change. But yeah, I got the title from in college, in grad school. I went to my doctor's office to be prescribed PrEP, which is a 1-a-day pill that you take that reduces your risk of contracting HIV by 100%, basically. But to get PrEP, I had to be diagnosed a quote unquote high risk homosexual, which is like a real thing that like appeared on my prescription. It's a real diagnosis. And yeah, I stared at it and I was like, this is so ridiculous and so so stupid that, you know, at the time it was like 2019, I was like, wow, we are still using like such antiquated, I guess, diagnoses like high risk homosexual. And basically it was sort of like my way of trying to like reclaim that and I guess point out the irony in it, because what I was doing at the time was the least risky thing that I could do, which is going on this medication that would help prevent me from contracting HIV, like not risky at all. But yeah, I got diagnosed a high risk homosexual and I thought it was really funny.
I think you got frozen, Edgar. I don't know, just for me, for everyone.
Am I frozen?
Oh, you're unfrozen now. But okay.
Well, it was one of those things I was like, oh crap. It says unstable. Am I still unstable? Okay, I'm good. Where I was like title of my memoir. So yeah, I made it the title. And then when I started telling people that, like their eyes started lighting up and I was like, okay, I'm onto something. I was worried that my publisher wasn't gonna let me have that as a title. Because some people were like, oh, maybe they won't let you keep it. And I know a lot of other people had to change their titles. But that's why I'm really happy that I went with the publisher that I went with, which is an independent publisher. And they were just a little bit more chill about things like that, so.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because that's a question that Curtis has, that did you get the title approved by the publisher or to whatever you wanted? And I guess you answer that because you went to an independent one, you got to do know whatever you want to do, but I mean, you got more freedom, right?
Yeah, they didn't even like mention anything about the title, about changing it. And yeah, I've heard from other writers that they completely had to change the title. I have a friend recently who they were gonna have a curse word, but like not even like that bad of a curse word on their title. And their publisher is making them change the entire title for marketing reasons, because basically when you send out emails, if there's like a curse word, it goes straight to spam, because it's going to be really hard to market and use with other books. All of those books will go to the spam folder. So yeah, it is a annoying thing to have to navigate. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it's this one, High Risk Homosexual, because Boys Club is like, what could it be about? But High Risk Homosexual is like, I know what this book is going to be about, you know, like right away. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the process of writing your book, because writing a memoir, it's hard. I don't know how many of you are writing a memoir right now or collection of essays. You can write it in the chat, but I think we all share that I don't know, I don't want to say fear, but yeah, fear of, you know, like telling our own things to anyone who will read this, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the process of writing the book. And for the process, I have like five different processes, but we'll start with the first one, because it's fascinating, like the description of your memories and how much do you remember, like when you were a child or a teenager. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. How do you go into your memories, or like how do you recreate the past of something that perhaps you have forgotten, you know?
Yeah, I think that is like probably the hardest thing for me, which is just remembering. And that's also like one of the most important things about being a memoirist, right? Memory. And full disclosure, it's just because I'm like a big stoner, and that affects my memories, and it affects like my word recall. Like I can never remember words. So yeah, it was a big process. I think there's a million things that you can do. One of the biggest ones is just do research. You can do, we're lucky to be part of, I mean, lucky and unlucky to be part of this social media generation. So let's say you're writing a story from like, I don't know, 10 years ago, and you don't remember, you know, what your hair was like at the time, or I don't know, if you need like to remember anything, you can just go on like Facebook and scroll back, and literally it will tell you like what you were doing, what thoughts you were having, probably like what music you were listening to. You have like all of this like data that you can mine just from like social media. Um, there's also just like doing research by like looking at photographs, or maybe you were the kind of person that, you know, wrote in your diary or your journal. I didn't do that because I lived with a bunch of nosy people who would like look through all my things. So I wasn't lucky enough to have a journal. um, or this is the way that I start basically any story. It's I will either have a composition notebook, or I'll open the notes app on my phone, and I will just like word vomit any memory, as like seemingly trivial as it may seem, into that document without any pressure to do anything with it. And I'll do this for at least a month or so. And I find that when you start off, it's a little bit more difficult. But as time progresses, memory is very associative. And once you like unlock one like room in your memory, you start unlocking like different things. For example, if I'm like writing about, I don't know, an argument I had with my mom in high school, which I literally did write about in the book, I would be like, okay, what are like the things that are most vivid to me right now? I remember the door breaking. I remember hiding underneath the covers. And I'll just put that into the Word document. And over time, I'll start remembering like little details will start trickling, like, oh yeah, and my mom would have been wearing that like leopard print house dress that she always used to change into. Oh, what was she doing when I came home? Oh, she was probably like sitting in the kitchen waiting for me. What was she doing? Oh, right. And then she did that really dramatic thing where she broke the tea with the tea mug. And so like little by little, everything will start coming to you. I think Mary Carr describes it as like, you start off with a knot and you like pull out one thread of the knot, and slowly it all starts unraveling and it all comes back to you. So that's how I start.
That's amazing.
And once I do that, then I have like a bunch of material that I just like, I think of as like, I have all the puzzle pieces that I just have to arrange into the story.
That's cool. Did you ever go back to interview any of the people that are in your book about anything?
No. I mean, I would love to have been the kind of person, I give the advice to do that if you feel comfortable doing that. But not everybody feels comfortable, especially if it's like you're writing about people that you don't speak to anymore, or who have harmed you in a way that having a conversation like that would create more harm. Or in my case, I really wanted to wait, you know, at least like 6 months or something, to see how my book did in the world before I brought it to like my mom, because I was worried how she was going to react to it. And I was like, if like, you know, I sell 30 copies, this is just going to disappear, and I don't ever have to have like those awkward conversations that basically every memoirist has, right? And so, yeah, I actually recently gave my mom a copy of my book. She read it immediately. And yeah, I ended up having that conversation after the fact, that I wrote about her, which I think was really helpful for me, because when I wrote the book, it was with the like, I never thought that she would read it. I never thought that anybody would read it. And that helped me feel like free to tell as authentic a story as I could, without the pressure of like making other people like feel like I rendered them correctly or this or that. I just got to tell my own story, like basically unfiltered, without that fear.
Wow, that's amazing. Because I don't remember if you told me when we met in AWP or in an interview somewhere that you dedicated your book to your mom, but she hasn't read it yet. And I was like, oh my goodness, like she didn't know you wrote it, right? Like something like that you waited for a while.
Yeah, I dedicated to her because in many ways, writing the book helped me heal my relationship with her, at least from my point of view, because it really, in order to create as fully dimensional a character as possible for her, I really had to ask myself what her motivations were, why she was acting the way she was acting, and especially when she did things that were maybe a little bit harmful. And through the process of answering those questions, I don't know, I guess I found a new sympathy for her that I didn't necessarily had before or I hadn't explored before. And the same thing for my brother. And so truly like writing the book helped me get to like a much better place in our relationships. And so that's why I dedicated it to them. At the same time, I'm from a very, you know, closed circled Latinx family where we don't like tell people our business. Um, we certainly don't tell people like our flaws. And so that was where my fear was coming from. Though I don't really treat my brother or my mom as like villains in the story in any way, I was worried that they would like see the one or two like maybe negative, you know, experiences that we had and just like hold on to those and not see like the big picture of this journey that we had of healing and of love.
Yeah, they definitely felt like really human, like really round characters. So I don't think they look like villains or anything. It's just really hard. Like I don't know how many memoirs are in the house, but I remember because I have published a few pieces, right? And I was just so happy that my parents, they don't speak English, so like I can write whatever you want in English, right? But then my brother, I don't know if he's here, but he kind of like took my article and kind of put it in Google Translate and kind of read it to them. I was like, great, like now they can read my stuff thanks to Google Translate. So
I hate Google Translate. It's ruined my life. Every time I used to be able to like tweet in Spanish and be like, nobody's gonna know what I'm talking about. I'm like in my own secret little zone. But now there's like even a little translate tweet button on Twitter. And that was the same thing with my mom, where I underestimated her ability to read English. Because I'd never really seen her read English a lot. She'd been in the US for, I think it's over maybe almost 30 years now. So obviously she's picked it up. And she had a job at Starbucks, so she spoke English there. But I thought her English was more limited than it was. And she ended up reading it in like 1 or 2 days. So yeah, go her.
yeah, Google Translate, you know, yeah, it kind of, yeah, it's the worst now. Like, and now I have a new one coming up where I say something about my parents. It's like something that they say I'm a being fat in this community. And I'm like, oh no, now they're gonna hear like everything I think, but like, you know, this is what we have to do. If we write essays and memorize, like let it be, right? Just let it out to the world. I have another question about your process. So did you always know it was going to be a book, or did you start like writing essays and then like, what if I like get all of this into a book as a memoir?
Exactly. That's how it started. When I tell people how long it took me to write the book, I always say like between 7 and 8 years. But that's because I'm counting stories that I wrote in undergrad for like a workshop that ended up making it into the book. And one of those is Boys Club, about going to this bathhouse in Orlando. And that was gonna be like the other title. But yeah, I was just writing like random essays for, you know, workshops. And after I graduated from undergrad, I just, I went back to work at the flip-flop shop at the Florida Mall. And I thought that was just gonna be it. And I was like, maybe I'll just write, you know, little essays until eventually I have enough essays to put together a book. And I'll publish just like random essays in the same way that like David Sedaris or Augustine Burroughs or a bunch of other writers will publish books that don't necessarily have like a strong unifying thread throughout the books. They're just like random essays. But then I went to grad school, and it was like really put in my head that I couldn't just like write random gay essays, that I needed like a link, that I needed it to make it more of a memoir. And so a lot of the essays that I had written at that point, I had to throw out. And then I, you know, started thinking about the book in more of a, you know, linear chronological way. I started thinking about the way each of the essays were in conversation with each other. And from that, more of a memoir in essays, which is what some people call it, started coming to the surface.
Yeah, I think you answered my next question, that it was like, what, how do you select what goes in the book, right? Because I imagine you have like all of these essays, you know, because our lives, you know, like are so long, and how do you decide what to, how do you select the essays or the chapters to go in the memoir?
I mean, part of it is just like, part of it is like that, you know, magical, like, oh, whatever happens, happens, you know, whatever like divine, you know, spirit takes over me and decides this is the next chapter, sure. But another part of it was I already had the beginning. I already knew, like I always knew where the book was gonna start. Even when it was gonna be a collection of essays, I already had in undergrad, I wrote the first chapter, which was called Malcriado, about going to my uncle's cockfighting ring in Nicaragua. And basically that was my starting point. And I was like, okay, this is gonna, if this is gonna be a memoir now, what like emotional starting point does this book begin in? And I started asking myself that, and I realized that, you know, this is a point in my life where I felt, I generally think this is where that first chapter, and I think the year after, I felt the most shame about being gay that I've ever felt in my whole life. And it was just like the most shame, the most despair, the most hopelessness. And I thought, okay, if that's where this book begins, and I don't necessarily feel that way now, then the journey that I'm going to go on is from shame to, you know, pride or to acceptance. And so once I had that sort of arc, I just had to go in and fill in the dots and be like, okay, well, pride is also like a very complicated thing. Like sometimes I'm proud, sometimes I'm not proud. Sometimes I'm just like really afraid. There's nights where like I'm walking through my neighborhood and I'm like, whoop, I hope I don't get, you know, mugged right now for being gay. And so I wanted to hold space for pride to exist alongside with fear. Because for a lot of queer people, we still live in fear. But I still felt proud, and I was like, well, I'm proud about certain things. I'm proud that, you know, when I was a kid, I would have never put on the outfits that I put on today. When I was a kid, I would have never felt comfortable introducing my mom to my boyfriend. I would have never done all of these things. I would have never felt comfortable just having like casual sex because of all of the fear that I had ingrained in me about HIV as a kid. And I don't feel those things anymore. And so I was like, okay, each chapter is gonna be me sort of overcoming one of those fears. And yeah, that is how I ended up filling in the dots, you know.
That's awesome. And regarding fear, because I remember I read in another article how you talk about fear being part of the narrative arc that you created in your book, right? And I remember this beautiful phrase that I'm gonna quote you, that you say, my lesson will be, you don't have to stop being afraid, but you have to try to not let that fear rule you, because there's so much you're going to miss, right? And I love that. I love that. And I just wanted to keep talking about that fear. How do you acknowledge that fear? Like, because when we feel fear, sometimes we're just feel anxiety and stress and all of it. And then it's later on in our lives that we think, okay, I was afraid, right? So how do you acknowledge the fear? How do you write about it? How do you write about fear with fear? I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I guess on a very, very practical level, if you feel fear, like, I guess, I mean, in my book, the way that I managed to like maintain that like narrative thread of fear is I asked myself, what are times that I was afraid? And then I just wrote that scene, right? And one way that I guess I sort of write about fear, but how internal it is and not always external, is that I feel like a lot of queer people have like this kind of PTSD where maybe, you know, something really traumatic related to our queerness happened early on. And for like the rest of our lives, even if like we're not directly in harm's way, something can happen that can trigger that fear. And then we'll get all in our heads and be like, oh my God, like, is this gonna happen again? Like, is everybody looking at me weird, or am I imagining this? And so I tried to, as much as I could, write those moments where that fear was really, really internal. And I guess explain where that fear came from as much as possible. I'm thinking of a couple of scenes. I'm thinking of when I was in this burlesque troupe in college, and this was in Florida, and we traveled out of Orlando to do a performance, and we ended up getting like changing into our costumes in this diner. And it was like a very like queer costume that I changed into. And as I walked out of the bathroom, I like swear everybody was like looking at me, and like the fear was like, oh my God, are these people gonna kill me? Like, is like the line cook gonna like run out with like a butcher knife and like do this and that? And like I hyped it up as much as possible because that's how I felt at the time. And then ultimately nothing happened. And so that's what I mean about like, it felt like PTSD, and that like you get like frozen and like think all of these like really awful things are gonna happen, and then ultimately sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes things do happen. But I guess just pinpoint as many times when you felt afraid, and maybe have as much layers to that fear as possible. Like, what are times where you were afraid and then the thing you were afraid of actually did happen? What are times when you were afraid and the thing didn't happen, but maybe it happened to other people? Or what are times where you did something that would have been super scary for you when you were younger? Yeah, so fear.
Yeah, that's so good. Now, everyone, a writing prompt, write what you are afraid of in the chat. I mean, if you want to. You know about my mostrito, Edgar, about my anxiety and everything. So I have so many fears in my life, but still, we have to continue. I remember that because I keep reading when you sign my book, and it's like, cuidado con el mostrito, which I love. It's so funny. Talking about funny and about humor. And I love the comedy in your memoir. I didn't know it was gonna be this funny, but I have read, like the backup, like and other things. But I love it, like since the beginning, since the it was not the acknowledgement, two important things before you read the book, right? And I was like, please don't sue me. And it's like I was laughing because I think a lot of us, again, if you're a memoirist or writing about your life, you're going to write eventually about other people's life, right? I mean, it's not only your life, you're in community. And Edgar wrote, please don't sue me. This is how I remember it, which I loved it. I loved it. It kind of sets the tone for the book. And there's just so many funny moments, like, thinking you have a boyfriend, imaginary condoms, when you do the wheel thing. Oh my God, I was laughing. If you have read the book of Edgar, you can comment what are your favorite comedy points in the book as well. And it's just magnificent how you do it, braiding the memoir and cultural critique, with this humor, with witty and humor. And I wanted to ask you, do you always write with humor, or did it just happen, or do you do it like consciously, like I'm gonna be funny, or how do you do it? Tell us.
I mean, the hope is that it comes across as funny. I guess I think of and it was very, very intentional for this book to have a lot of humor, because it also has a lot of darkness and trauma. And when I thought about who my audience for the book was, I always thought, how like cool would it be if a young Latinx queer kid picked up my book and it like gave them a little bit of hope. And I was like, if this book is just really, really dark, it's just gonna make them be like, oh my God, no, I can never come out of the closet. I can never tell anybody. And so I see humor as a way to subliminally tell the reader that though what they're reading is really traumatic or really hard, I've at least reached a place in my life where I can look back and I can laugh. And so that is my way of giving the reader hope. And I've thought about humor in writing a lot lately. I remember pretty recently, maybe not that recently, like 2 years ago, I was watching this TV show, American Crime Story, The Murder of Gianni Versace. And it's, this TV show, and it's about the murder of Gianni Versace, and it's very queer, blah, blah, blah. And the murderer kills a bunch of queer people before he kills Gianni Versace. And it's a really beautiful show. It's like set in the 80s. It's Ryan Murphy. The fashion is like beautiful. It's like a spectacle. And I remember I was watching it one day, and it was like episode 2 or 3, and it was a murder scene. And I found myself like covering my eyes and looking away, and also like covering my ears, and I like couldn't look because it was too much. It was too intense. I really couldn't. And after that, I was like, if this show made me close my eyes and cover my ears, does that mean that it failed as art because I like want nothing to do with it? I am like going out of my way to not engage with this art. Does that mean that it's failing? But after like 2 minutes, I ended up, uncovering my eyes, uncovering my ears, and I kept watching the show. And what I was asking myself was, what is the thing that made me go back? Why did I keep watching the show despite, this horribly traumatic thing? And I realized that it was how beautiful it was. It was the soundtrack. It was like, the characters were really funny outside of those scenes. And I was like, okay, when I'm writing, and that's like a lesson that I guess I learned about writing, if I'm writing something really difficult, I want to, I guess, promise the reader that it's going to get a little bit better after this, and that they're going to want to come back. And I think there's a million ways to do that. I choose humor because that's like what I'm most like, I guess, natural at. But other writers use just like beautiful poetic prose. I think of like Takira Madden, Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls. There's a lot of darkness in that book, but it's just so beautiful. I could like read her describe a blade of grass. And so I was always like, oh, this moment is so, so hard, but I'm gonna keep, turning the page because I want to hear her, describe that blade of grass. There's different things that you can do. Beautiful prose, humor. Maybe it's just like the subject of the book is so interesting that people are going to return to it no matter what, right? Because there's a bunch of different things.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you say because it's a balance. Not everything is going to be like trauma, or like violence or just one single thing, like just in everything in life. No, everything is going to be a comedy. There has to be a balance about everything. So yeah, you explained it so well. And it just remind me, I watch Stranger Things just like you watch, because it's so scary for me. So I just watch. It's like, and I told my husband, like, did it pass already? Did it pass? It's just so many, kids. It's just horrible.
But you keep watching it, right?
So, yeah. So I do that as well. Like this, I do that a lot. So thank you for sharing it. I think a lot of people in the chat have. They're identified with that balance, and that counterbalance that you explained so well. We have a few questions already in the chat, but I'm gonna wait a few more minutes, and so we can answer those. And I wanna ask you about what about a memoir craft advice that you wish you knew before you started writing your memoir?
Memoir craft advice.
That you wish you knew before you started, like, I wish I knew before, so I'm not like going around and thinking about this.
Yeah. I will say, I feel like when I started writing in undergrad, I kind of was just like, this happened and then this happened, and all right, the end. And there wasn't like a big like shift from beginning to end of my stories. And in graduate school, I actually started taking fiction classes because my program, you could take fiction, you could take poetry, you could take screenwriting. And when I was taking, when I was taking memoir writing classes in undergrad, though I found the conversations we had were really useful, a lot of the conversations were just like, what are the ethics of writing nonfiction? What do you do if how do you like navigate writing about people you know? There were things like that, but it wasn't as big of a focus on craft or on creating a narrative arc. Or there were things like, how do we make this image more beautiful, which would be craft, but there just wasn't a lot of craft conversation. It wasn't until graduate school, when I started taking fiction classes, that I started asking myself of my memoir, of my nonfiction, a lot of the questions that fiction writers ask themselves. Questions like, and I don't think you have to ask these questions of every story, but I do find them useful for the type of writing that I do. I think one set of questions you could ask yourself is, who is the main character? It's usually pretty obvious in memoir because 9 times out of 10 gonna be you. What do you want? You know, having a motivation, a want. That wasn't a thing that I had in my mind when I first started writing. What are the stakes? What are the consequences? What happens if this character gets what they want? What happens if they don't get what they want? All of those questions, I wasn't asking myself them. I was basically just like transcribing like the actual events that happened and hoping that was interesting enough. The other question that you could ask yourself is, how do I change from beginning to the end of the story? Or how do I not change from beginning to end? But was I presented with the opportunity to change and I didn't take it? So asking myself those 2 sets of questions really changed the game for me. And it really allowed me to start seeing myself as a character rather than just like journaling, you know, the things that happened. And I would also ask those questions of the people around me. For example, when I was writing about my mom, I would ask myself, you know, I guess if I were just transcribing the events, it would just be like a traumatic scene. But after asking myself the question, for example, what was her motivation? I was able to speculate that, you know, she was probably trying to protect me. And I uncovered a bunch of things like, you know, in Nicaragua until 2008, it was illegal to be gay. She didn't know any queer people in her hometown. When she immigrated to Miami, the culture she immediately saw, the queer culture she saw was a scene that was just ravaged by the AIDS crisis. And so for all those reasons, those were her sort of motivations. And what were her stakes? If she didn't protect me from being queer, I would have died to her. And so asking those questions of other characters, and it can be really, really hard, especially if it's somebody who's harmed you, to be like, oh, I wonder why they slapped me. I wonder why they, you know, did this other thing to me. Nobody wants to ask those questions, but it does help to create a more multidimensional character. The other thing is, if you don't want to ask those questions, that's also fine, of people who have harmed you. You can always establish early on in the story that like, you just don't like, you don't fuck with that person and you're not gonna try to like, that this depiction isn't gonna be a completely unbiased one. And just make sure that that contract is clear with the reader so that they don't think that you're rendering like a, you know, biased, unbiased, objective point of view. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. And I love the idea also of treating them as characters instead of, I mean, they're people, of course, but kind of reimagining what they were thinking or the stakes that they were in place, right? Because so much of us is imagining what they were thinking because we cannot know what everyone is thinking the whole time, right? So we had to use our creativity or fiction a little bit, you know, to kind of like thread those needles, you know, like all those ideas. That's so interesting because for me as I write essays, I wanna. It's hard for me to imagine, for example, my parents, what they think, because I don't know if anyone happens to feel that way, but until we grow up, we see them as people, right? Because if it was just mom and dad, but they have like really interesting stories, right? And I don't know, that's happened to me. So I don't know much about their lives until we start like questioning as we grow up, right? Yeah. So that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Edgar. And what about the best advice? So now that was before, you know, your whatever you wish to know before. Now the best advice that you received during the writing of your memoir. That is like, thank you, so and so, or that you realized or something.
The best advice. Oh. Let me think about this one. I would say it wasn't necessarily, well, one thing was I did appreciate being told that my book, this is a complicated thing. On one hand, I wish that I'd been allowed to just write a collection of gay stories. And I wish that they did not have to be related. And I wished that I had some of the privilege of other writers who can just like publish anything. At the same time, this is a business, and I guess I do appreciate the professor that asked me to have more of a narrative thread and to shift it to be more of a memoir. Because if I hadn't done that, it probably would not have been published. Because I was unknown, and because, you know, I'd heard this a lot, but I kind of needed somebody to just tell me it, that essay collections are a little bit harder to sell. And so while I like resented having to have this narrative thread and do all this other stuff and throw away other stories that I found to be interesting and replace them with other things and do all this extra work, I also think it made for a stronger story in the end and a more, I guess, a more cohesive story. And I'm not mad at how it turned out. So I guess I do appreciate hearing that. The other thing that I appreciate hearing on a similar vein was a professor, this was like maybe 2 or 3 years into my grad school program, a professor just straight up said, "Oh, you're a humorist, I get it now." And up until that point, I'd felt this pressure to only write like suffering and trauma. And once somebody recognized that I was also trying to be funny and that was not only, you know, something I was interested in, but like an important part of my project, like I described earlier to you, that also was really useful, because then I was like, okay, now I'm free to like lean into that, that more comedic voice. But it was also hard because there's some things where it's like, how do I make this funny? Like, this is just sad. But yeah, I'm glad that he recognized that so that I could pursue that, I guess.
That's great. And it's always good, you know, like to have that people around, you know, as a community. And I'm gonna ask you the last question before we go to, because we have like 4 questions already from the audience. So I wanna get to them. So for all the writers out there, I imagine everyone wants the sense of community, because honestly, that's how we advance as writers, right? I mean, we write alone, but we need other writers as well. And I know you have an amazing writing group. I know them all. And I just want, I don't know if you want to share any advice on how to create your community. How do you find your amazing group, and how to find people that support you, right?
That's a really good question. And I think that's really, really important, to find your writerly community that will motivate you and, you know, keep you going. And even if it's just like, for example, I'm in a writer's group and we like give each other like, all right, by August, we're all gonna meet and discuss the story, so that I already have a deadline that I have to write towards. So giving me things like that. But also just like whenever I like leave like a reading or like a literary event, I always feel so inspired to go home and write too. So I think it's important to surround yourself with writers, because that like will like subliminally sink in and make you want to go write and like keep up with them and do all that. But so regarding community, it's a two-way street. I think some people think, how do I find people who are going to support me? Whereas what they should be asking is, how do I find people that I can be in community with, meaning that we can mutually support each other. And I think that is a key difference. And so there's a lot of things you can do. Maybe you do live in one of these like literary cities like New York, like LA, where you can attend a bunch of readings and, you know, go in person and show your support and introduce yourself, not only to the authors, but to the people who are at the reading with you. That's one way. There's also online, attend readings like this, you know, follow each other on Twitter. I think one big thing is taking writing classes online. There's so many writing programs at Catapult, Hugo House, Tin House. Like there's a bunch of virtual writing programs that you can take. Many of them offer scholarships. And I know that I've taught a couple of those. And after my workshops end, sometimes my students will form writing groups of their own. And then they'll go off and then they have a writing group, or they'll follow each other online and then they're in community with like, you know, 8, 9 more people. There's also just like Twitter. I know a lot of people love to like, you know, roast Twitter, but a lot of the people that I've met haven't actually been through in-person events, haven't been through taking classes, but it's just straight up been through, I read an amazing story, I felt like I wanted to share it, and I tagged the author, and I was like, this was so beautiful. I think Hannah does a really good job at that, at always sharing other people's work. She's in the chat. The thing about that is just to not be fake about it. I think, you know, people are excellent detectors of bullshit. And it's like pretty obvious when you're just like sharing to like, you know, get to know somebody, to slide into their DMs. Just be authentic about, you know, being in community online. And over time, it's a job. Like it takes a lot of work, but in a couple of months, you will, you know, have more writer friends and they'll start sharing some of your work when you have work published, and it just like perpetuates. So those are some ways.
Amazing, thank you, Edgar. And everyone, start community right now. Put your Twitter handle in the chat. And there's a question about Maureen about the book, but I hope that that got answered with what we're talking about before. If the MFA was helpful for the book. If not, Maureen, just write it. You can write yes or no, and we can ask it again. Curtis has questions. He said, I just started reading your book and I'm really enjoying it. I'm working on a memoir that I sold to Little Brown. Oh, congratulations. And it's coming up in fall 2023. The final manuscript is due next month. Can you talk about the process of submitting your final manuscript to your publisher? How do you know when you were done revising? Did you have the impulse to want to keep revising?
Yes, I don't even like to open my book. Like I have my like 3 little passages that I read at readings. And outside of that, I do not like to read it. Because both on a craft level and just on a human level, I'm always wanting to revise. On a craft level, I'm like, oh, that sentence could have been more beautiful, that image, or that sentence maybe was a little clunky. I wish I could have edited that. On a human level, we're always just growing as people, right? And you know, I will open my book and I'll be like, I don't even recognize that person, like, or I don't get why I had that thought, and I will have like that impulse to want to revise it. So basically, you know, I don't really super look at it, but I think it's a good thing. The fact that I will open my book and be like, oh, I could have made this more beautiful, or this sentence a little bit more eloquent, means that I've gotten better as a writer. It would be really like bad if, for example, I was reading like a 4th grade, you know, report that I made or that I wrote, and I was like, wow, this is perfect. I could not have done any better in the 4th grade. Like constantly you want to be able to look back and be like, oh, I'm better now. If not, then that means that you have stopped growing, and who wants that, right?
Thank you so much, Edgar. And Anne had a question about how to start their, you know, to share their work with if they don't have a literary agent. I hope the answer about writing community helped you answer that question. If not, write it in the chat again, and we can get to answer that in the like last 5 minutes that we have. Do we have more questions over here? Oh, I think they have the answer. So if anyone has more questions, you can just write it in there. So now I wanted to ask you two more things, two different things, just to close it up in case anyone has more questions. And I love everything that you wrote about rom-coms, because it's like, oh my God, Edgar, we need to be best friends, because I love rom-coms. I watch everything that you watch and that is in your book. And I just wanted to ask, what are you watching right now? And another question, and then more questions in the chat if you have any. Go ahead, Edgar.
That's so funny. I just rewatched The Wedding Planner like a week ago. You know what I'm watching right now that kind of gives rom-com vibes a little bit, more than like tonally. This show on HBO Max called Gordita. It's about—
I love it. I watch it all. Yeah.
It's so cute. It's about this Dominican family, and the main character is this young girl, and she's just so funny. And yeah, that's what I'm watching right now. Also, I watched the JLo documentary. I thought it was good. Yeah, that's what I'm watching.
Yeah, I love Gordita's Chronicles. Everyone watch it on HBO. And yeah,
I love.
Sorry.
No, go.
Okay, we'll talk later. Yeah, and I love that phrase that you said about rom-coms. Instead of projecting myself into rom-coms, I wrote them. And it was like, wow, that's great. You know, you started creating and writing your own stories, which is just really amazing. And one last question. Let me see if we have more questions here in the chat. I have a question from Elle. Are you interested in developing into a film?
Yes, Elle, are you a person who can make that happen?
Great question. Oh yeah, okay. A film producer. Oh, okay. Yes. Share your email.
Go on my website. I have a TV film agent at UTA named Addison Duffy. Maybe hit her up. She sent the book out to a bunch of producers, and we're waiting to hear back.
That's amazing. See, great. This is how we create community, and we started, writing and sharing work. And also Anne, that she's interested, in sharing work with other people. You can start, talking about it. Hey, I want to share, work with you, etc. This is how we do it. And another question that I have so many questions, but I want to finish with the question, what brings you joy? What brings you joy? Which is the question of right now, Edgar, right now. Just kidding.
What brings me joy? I live in Queens, New York, in Jackson Heights, and it's like the best neighborhood in the whole world. And we just have so much good food. And so eating brings me joy. Eating momos and dumplings and birria and enchiladas and just all the food. Sometimes I'll go to bed and I'm like, I can't wait for breakfast. So what brings me joy is food. And also seeing happy queer people, especially in these like really chaotic times with anti-trans legislation all over the country, the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. Just seeing movies. Here's a rom-com that I recently loved and watched, Fire Island. It's on Hulu. It's a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice with a queer Asian cast. Bowen Yang is in it. It was so funny. And just seeing queer people be successful, queer people of color be successful, just makes me so happy, because it makes it, in the same way that growing up, I would have watched rom-coms to expand like my idea of what was possible for me. Seeing queer people of color be successful expands the idea of what is possible for me. I'm like, wow, they made it, I can make it.
That's so great, Edgar, sending hearts. And I'll ask you later, what do you think about Love Victory in Hulu? But I'll ask you later because we have like 1 minute. Okay, 60 seconds. What are you working right now? And then we get to close with some Bad Bunny again.
Sure. So I'm working on another memoir about growing up really poor in Orlando, Florida, and all of my chaotic attempts to pull myself and my family out of poverty, from begging for money outside of a Walmart as a kid, to catfishing men online, sex work, and selling designer sandals at the flip-flop shop.
Well, everyone wants to read your next book then también, Edgar. So everyone go and buy Edgar's book, support the Writer Center. Thank you everyone for being here. And that's it. And thank you everyone for bringing joy here. And I'm gonna close it up for the last 60 seconds with some Bad Bunny again. I hope you hear it. Thank you everyone.